So you're all very welcome to our Irish Studies seminar this afternoon, which emerges really from research undertaken by the Contemporary Irish Music Centre on gender balance and publicly funded composer opportunities, which in turn is grounded in much wider questions and issues and conversations to do with gender balance and music making and the arts in Ireland. So first off, quick thanks to the Moore Institute for co-hosting and facilitating certainly the technical aspects of the seminar. To introduce myself, my name is Verena Cummins. I'm a lecturer here in the Centre for Irish Studies in NUI Galway. And it's my great pleasure then to welcome two guest speakers and two respondents today. So I don't want to take up valuable time by giving very long introductions. So just very briefly, really mentioning current research, I'd like to firstly welcome Dr. Laura Watson, who is an Associate Professor of Music in Maynooth, and current projects then that she's working on centre on women, feminism and music, which includes the forthcoming co-edited book, Women in Music in Ireland. And Laura is a co-founder and member of the Sounding the Feminists working group, and I'm sure that work will come up today during the course of the seminar. As well as being an international research collaborator on the AHRC-funded Women and Musical Leadership online network. Following Laura then, Dr. Michael Lydon of this parish is a lecturer in popular music studies and gender and Irish music then here in the Centre for Irish Studies. And he's also then a research associate for the Contemporary Music Centre and Sounding the Feminists. So before I hand you over then to our two speakers, I'm delighted to welcome two guest respondents today. So we have Roisin Maher, who is a PhD candidate at DCU, whose research in her PhD examines the representation of women composers on undergraduate music history programmes in Ireland. She's also a lecturer at the Cork School of Music, and she's also taught at Trinity and Mary I and the National College of Ireland. And she's the co-founder and artistic director of Finding a Voice, a concert series that showcases and celebrates music by women composers. And we also have Dr. Ealaíon Dillane as guest respondent. Then Ealaíon is an ethnomusicologist and senior lecturer at the Irish World Academy in the University of Limerick. She's currently co-director of the Centre for the Study of Popular Music and Popular Culture, and she's the PI on the HERA-funded project Festiversities, Music Festivals, Public Space and Cultural Diversity. And Ealaíon and Roisin then will be responding to some of the themes and issues addressed by Michael and Laura. We'll then open it up at the end for any questions or comments that anybody here in the audience might have. And just if you use the Q&A function then rather than the chat function for that. So the short version of the title is an uneven score. And at that point, I'd like to hand it over then to yourself, Laura, Dr. Laura Watson. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Verena. So I'm going to share some slides with you all. Okay, I trust that everybody can see these slides. Perhaps if somebody could just say yes or no.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I was delighted to be invited to take part in this seminar today. And the purpose of my presentation is really just to give a short introduction and some background to Sounding the Feminists, which will then help to contextualize the work that Michael is doing and which he's going to talk about. So I've been involved with Sounding the Feminists kind of from the earliest days. So I just thought I'd share some light on how we got to where we are. So as I'm sure everybody at this seminar will know, I suppose one of the bigger contexts for Sounding the Feminists is the work of Waking the Feminists. And Waking the Feminists originated in response to this programme, which was announced for the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. It was their way of commemorating 1916, the centenary. So they announced a programme for their 2016 season, which was to be called Waking the Nation. Now, the response to this was not entirely positive. As I'm sure we all know, there was a huge response from a group of women and allies, and that became known as So the Waking the Feminists were responding to the serious gender imbalance in the Waking the Nation programme. And I think one of the lasting legacies of Waking the Feminists was the research they did, which began in 2016 and was published in 2017. And that was the Gender Counts audit of, as you can see here, Gender in Irish Theatre from 2006 to 2015. So this was the kind of environment in 2016. So the Abbey Theatre wasn't the only cultural institution that wanted to mark the centenary of the Rising. In the National Concert Hall, there was a season, well, just a kind of a month-long festival announced for September 2016. And this was called Composing the Island, where the idea was to celebrate a century of art music in Ireland. Now, this was announced several months after the Waking the Nation debate. So it was kind of surprising to see that some of the same problems that had arisen with Waking the Nation turned up again in Composing the Island. So here's an example of some of the critical response to Composing the Island. So Michael Dervin in the Irish Times pointed out that this festival neglected women and living composers under the age of 30. Another writer in the online Trinity News 2 magazine, Dara Kelly, pointed out that Irish composers, notably Siobhan Cleary, had criticised the serious gender imbalance in the festival. So as Dara Kelly also notes here, a group of composers began kind of sort of organically forming under this banner of Composing the Feminists. So we went from Composing the Feminists to Sounding the Feminists, I guess, within the space of about 6 or 7 months. So a timeline of what happened puts us starting in June 2016, when the composer Jane Deasy organised an event in Dublin, where the idea was to kind of hold a public town hall meeting discussing the lack of women composers in the NCH Centenary programme. Then several months later, there was a meeting of composers, performers, musicologists, administrators, and so on at the Contemporary Music Centre. I attended that meeting in February 2017, and it was at that meeting where the name Sounding the Feminists was agreed. A couple of months after that meeting, there was another meeting in April, again at the CMC. I was also at that meeting, and it was agreed that a working group for Sounding the Feminists would be established. That working group was elected. I was one of the people elected on that working group, and this was the original working group. You can see the 5 people. Since then, Dr. Jenny O'Connor-Madsen and Dr. Amanda Feary kind of stepped back because of other commitments. So the current working group remains Dr. Karen Power, who's the chair, Dr. Anne Clear, and myself. So what we did, the working group, well, we set up a website, we put together a mission statement, which you can have a look at yourselves in your own time. And I would say then, since 2017, I'd say there are a few main actions that we've done. I summarized them here. So I thought I would just sort of quickly run through those. So the first thing we did was establish partnerships with relevant organizations. The main one was with the National Concert Hall. So on the eve of International Women's Day in 2018, a 5-year partnership initiative was announced. And you can see that's a photo of Karen talking at the event. And I would say 2 of the main things that arose out of that partnership, one was an annual chamber series, which, well, it ran for 2 years and then the pandemic interrupted things. So you can see here are some of the advertisements for a couple of concerts. So each chamber series featured 6 concerts, and the repertoire in the chamber series was predominantly focused on music composed by women. And the repertoire ranged historically from the 17th century up to the present day. And it spanned composers from Ireland to the broader Western European and generally Western art music tradition. It also featured some composers from Asia too. The other main thing to happen in the National Concert Hall and Sounding the Feminists partnership was a commissioning scheme. And we were delighted that this kind of scheme was able to materially support composers who are working from, in Ireland today, and Irish composers who may be based abroad. So the commissioning scheme, to show you the winners of the inaugural year, the winners were Jennifer Walsh and Claudia Schwab. So we had two categories there in that year. There was the established composer category and the emerging composer. In the most recent round of the commissioning scheme, we had more awards, and this was because the chamber series wasn't running, so we were able to support the kind of creative work a bit more. So again, we were delighted to support all of the artists mentioned here: Aina Brennan, Amelia Clarkson, Finola Merivale, and Wyburn Lingo. So we've also set up partnerships with organisations beyond the National Concert Hall, just some of them mentioned here. Something else we did, again, in partnership with Dundalk Technology, we co-hosted a symposium that was in November 2018, and we were delighted to have Dr. Aileen Dillane as our keynote speaker there. One of the things I think we liked about the symposium is that it brought together not just academics, but also activists, artists, and music industry workers. Something else we did in 2019 was to organise a series of workshops, which was intended to enhance opportunities for professional development, for networking, to get tips on things like grant writing, making connections, with media and so on. And this series of workshops was generously sponsored by IMRO. Something else we did, which of course Mike will be talking more about, is we made a start on the gender research we wanted to do. Something else which we did too, and again this kind of arose out of conversations which were going on with different organisations, is we were involved in consultancy for when the Arts Council of Ireland were developing a new equality, human rights and diversity policy and strategy. And you can see that the policy and strategy published in 2019 mentioned Sounding the Feminists, along with, of course, Waking the Feminists and Fair Play. Then this is an example of our kind of international connections we're increasingly making. So I'm a research collaborator on this network, which is based in the UK, and it's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. And as part of this network, we've hosted some workshops. We have more coming up. And at the most recent workshop, Karen Power was one of the guest speakers. So we're trying to reach a wider community with this kind of work. I thought I would sum up here what I see myself as, kind of looking at it from the inside, as what I see as being the impact of Sounding the Feminists so far. So I would say that, we have seen we've influenced through the Arts Council policy, perhaps, the development of the kind of national equality and diversity strategy in the arts. I think we've increased mainstream media and public awareness about gender inequalities in Ireland's music world. We have been able to support the creation and performance of new internationally acclaimed works by artists such as Jennifer Walsh. We've also seen some evidence of increased consideration of gender issues in concert programming. And we've also begun to develop new research on music and gender in Ireland through the CMC hosted project. So I think that's everything I want to say. So thank you very much for listening. And I am delighted now to hand over to Mike Lydon.
Many thanks, Laura. I'm just going to share my slides in a moment as well. I just want to thank Aileen and Roisin for agreeing to be respondents today, and to Laura as well for initially this seminar began with an invitation myself to give a research to present the research I'm working on, but I thought it would be very helpful for Laura, which it was, to give a context of Sounding the Feminists So thank you very much, Laura, for agreeing to that. So just give me 1 second, I'll share my slides. I presume everybody can see this okay. So again, yes, thank you very much to Roisin and Ealaíon. I look forward to your input in a few moments. I'd like to just acknowledge as well the work of the Contemporary Music Centre in for their funding of the project as part of through the Arts Council's strategic funding, which I'll discuss in a bit of detail in a few moments' time. What I'm looking to discuss really as part of the research project I'm currently working on is really just break it down into the two phases. First, so the first phase and the second phase of the research, where we're initially calling uneven score. I'm going to look initially at the timescale of the research as it pertains to phase one, the methodology from phase one, challenges and dissemination of the research. Phase one began in 2019 and was carried out successfully by Dr. Ciara Murphy, who is a postgraduate researcher currently based at NUI Galway. Ciara was heavily involved in Waking the Feminists, which Laura spoke of a few moments ago, and she was she made significant contributions to the gender counts publication that became part of that. And as part of the work she did as part of phase one, she published a scoping project report. I don't want to go into a huge amount of details of that aspect today because I don't want to speak of somebody else's work. So I'm just going to put that details of the scoping the project report in the chat. So if anybody wants to get it, it was published on the CMC's website on the 1st of March. And that details are published in chat here as well. I'm just going to briefly outline Ciara's work. And again, I just want to actually acknowledge Ciara's support for my beginning of phase two of the project, and thank Ciara publicly for all her help in transitioning over to the role. I want to speak briefly about Ciara's methodology, some of the definitions that she spoke about, significantly some of the challenges uncovered, because these same challenges are becoming relevant throughout the project, and also some of the proposed project outcomes and recommendations. This is just a brief screenshot of the announcement, and as I said, that's in the chat if you want to share that and look into the details. I should acknowledge firstly in the methodology that was outlined, and I won't read all these points, but just highlight in particular that the original years of the project was a 30-year project from 1988 to 2018. Those of you who are here, I presume, will recognize that the project is now a 15-year project from 2004 until 2019. So the decision was made at the beginning of the announcement of the second phase of the research to go to a 15-year project based upon some of the evidence that Ciara uncovered as part of phase one, and really particularly relating to some of the challenges that came about. I won't speak too much about the methodology here, because the methodology, I'll speak about it as part of phase two in a bit more detail. Crucially, at the outset of the project, Ciara and work she was doing with the project's advisory panel really looked to outline some of the key definitions of the project. So briefly, I'll just highlight these. So gender, the study will recognize gender not as a fixed biological binary, but as a fluid and self-definition identification. I won't read all of that, but composition, again, it's important to get the definitions at the early stage of the project correct. So the composition, this project is concerned with analyzing contemporary Western art composition, which we define as original piece of work in music, either vocal or instrumental, the structure of a musical piece, or the process of creating or writing a new piece of music. And of course, a composer, people who create new compositions in line with definitions above. Some of the challenges, I want to spend a moment just speaking about the challenges that Ciara outlined, because they're still very relevant as part of my phase of the project. So the acquisition of data is really the key stumbling block so far. Much of this pertains to really a lack of records. This is something that it's been acknowledged in Ciara's scope in the project, and something that I'm finding almost really it's becoming a bit of a stumbling block in certain sectors of the research, which I'll talk in more detail as I go into phase two. Another aspect that she highlights in the report is when gender counts and was published, there was the same level of data protection that we recognize as GDPR wasn't wasn't there. So that's becoming a bit of a stumbling block as well. That enough when Ciara initially were contacting some organizations, she was met with a GDPR blocking releasing certain information. She also highlights and something, and if you are interested in this, I'd recommend looking at the section of the report where she mentions sending in a freedom of information request to Wexford County Council, really trying to acquire the information and be met with the unfortunate realization that even with the freedom of information, that the information wasn't forthcoming because it just wasn't found. So the lack of records, staff changes is also a significant factor in this, that there seems to be, particularly within local arts officers, local councils, there seems to have been, with staff changes over the years, that seems to have brought whole new filing systems and whole new projects and different ways of doing it. So I'll speak about this in a bit more detail as I speak about my own project, but I just want to highlight some of the concerns that Ciara raised initially. At the end of the project, Ciara also highlighted some of the project's outcomes and recommendations. Again, I won't speak in too much detail about these, but I just want to highlight really what the ultimate goal is, and which we're looking to address, I'll address in a few moments' time, is really the publication of data and research material emerging from the research project. So a publication that will be available hopefully towards the end of or middle of September. And ultimately that will hopefully develop an updated guidelines for commissioning for commissioning and program strategy, and also for fees, which will be done in collaboration with CMC and the Association of Irish Composers. To move on to my part of the research, so phase 2, I was going to briefly talk about the timescale of the project, the methodology, and some of the dissemination of the research so far. So I began my work. I should actually mention, just because Laura mentioned a few moments ago, my interest in Sounding the Feminists as an organization and the important research being done by Laura and Anne and Karen would began when I presented a paper at the Sounding the Feminist Symposium in Dundalk, and I was very taken back that day by some of the really the excellent work being done by Sounding the Feminists and from many of the participants that day. So when the position became available, it was something I was quite excited to be involved in. So I was very pleased to begin the project in December of 2021. At that point, I looked to initiate a kind of a 3-step process to the project. So when it began in December, I'll speak about these in a bit more detail, but I should just outline at this stage, I'm hoping for completion of the project in September of 2022. The first phase of the research, the first step in my phase 2 of the research really would have began with looking over the work that Ciara did and working closely with Ciara about some of the challenges, discussing some of the challenges that she came across. Again, throughout all of this, I worked very closely with Yvonne Ferguson, who's the director of CMC, and with Anne-Marie Hughes, who is the library coordinator at CMC, the Contemporary Music Centre in Dublin, who have, from the very outset, have been very forthcoming with their time and help. But with them, from the very beginning, it was looking over the report and trying to get a methodology in place, which I'll speak about in a few moments. One of the initial steps I took really to the project was establish pertinent individual funding awards that were assigned by the Arts Council of Ireland, the ACI, and the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, ACNI, from 2004 to 2019. I'll speak about all these points briefly, and I'll expand on them in a few moments' time, okay? But then it was I looked to create a list of ACI organizations, data set from 2004 to 2019, and again create an ACNI organization data set from 2004 to 2019. And then towards the latter part of that stage, which would have been February of this year, it was, I looked to consider various different software to processing the data and so on, which I'll speak about in a moment. This is the current stage of the research which I'm on right now, and I suppose the most important one to speak of here would be the first points are to create a comprehensive data set of commissions based on CMC library. One thing that obviously drawing from the research that was done by Ciara, it was the record of a lack of the recognition of the lack of records was going to be a significant stumbling block. So it became very clear for me at the very beginning that the CMC library had the most up-to-date records of commissions during the 15-year time period that I'm looking at currently. So working closely with Anne-Marie Hughes, I have been working on creating this year-by-year list of commissions, which I'll speak about in a bit of detail. But that's been one of the most, I suppose, time-consuming aspects of the research. But it'll be one of the kind of it's where the foundation of the research will is beginning. And again, I can speak about this in a few minutes' time again. At the second point here, so based on ACI funding and advice from the Projects Advisory Board, I'm also creating a list of commissioning organizations. Using the CMC library dataset, create a template to send commissioning organizations. I'll speak about this in a few moments too as well. And then cross-reference commissions with no listed commissioner with ACI and ACI data. This will make sense when I get to the next slide. So this is just a brief indication of what I mean when I talk about create a comprehensive data set of commissions based on CMC library. So you can see here, this is a list going from it's 2004 to 2019. I'm currently at 2-year, just beginning 2016 of this list at the moment. And every year it's I'm coming across around 120 to 160 roughly commissions that are listed as part of the CMC's library. The CMC library is ultimately based on listed composers who were registered with CMC. So you can see just as a brief outline of some of the details that I'm taking from the data. We have composer, obviously the gender of the composer is highlighted, nationality, title of work, instrumentation and performers are key, really for stage 3 of the project, which will be ultimately assessing the scale of the various different commissions. Duration is a key aspect again, so you can see I've separated the duration by gender with men and women, put in 7 categories again to correlate all this together at the end and to get an accurate reflection of the duration across gender. You can see the commissioner, a number of them, if there isn't a listed commissioner, but it has a premiere in the year of the commission, I'm including it because I'm looking to cross-reference that ultimately with the ACI and the ACNI individual data funding as well. So I'll speak about this in a few moments' time, but just the reason that there's some empty spaces within the commissioner brackets there is because I'm hoping to, by assessing these other funding streams, publicly funded streams, that will ultimately fill in these blanks along the way. As you can see, on number 5 here, there's a commission from the Arts Council of Ireland. Lyric FM is represented, say, Jenny Walsh, number 6. John Kinsella, RTE for the National Symphony Orchestra. So there's various different commissioning bodies across that I'm finding. So I say Music Network down on number 15. And these are all listed too with the premieres in place as well. I should make a little point about the notes at the end. So a number of these I have to add information based on information I can't find on the CMC's website. So you can see, say for example, number 13, Ian Wilson's Eyeless Upon a Dark River. I had to find the duration from Ian Wilson's website. So if any information I'm not finding, I'm updating that in the notes section, so then I can ultimately update the CMC database when we're done. The reason this is done, and going back to the previous slide, is I'm using the CMC library dataset to create a template, to create a template to ultimately send on to commissioning organizations. The reason this has been done, and I'll get to this file right now, is, again, we're looking to engage as much as possible with the various different organizations, whether it be, the Arts Council, whether it be RTE Lyric FM, RTE, Music Generation, local arts offices, with the hope that if we provide them the information that we're finding from the CMC's library, that we can ultimately present that to them and say, this is what we have, and we think that you have done that say RTE Lyric FM has commissioned over the last 15 years. Can you confirm whether this is true or not, and fill in the blanks? And we're hoping by adopting that strategy, we'll get a greater level of engagement. Again, going back to some of the issues that Ciara highlighted in scoping the project, and some of the issues that I found so far is, I suppose a failure, or, well, I mean, really, a lot of these organizations are really struggling with getting people to do this work, and with their own time restraints and with their own issues. So really, I don't want them to feel, I'm conscious of time here, I don't want them to feel that they're being being put under too much pressure to really give some information over. So by providing them with this information at hand, I hope it'll make it easier for them. So just to go back and see this list here. So this is what we're going to send, and I'll use Lyric FM as an example, because Lyric is listed twice here within the CMC's library data set. So you can see there is a listing under Jenny Walsh's is listed, and there's also a listing under David Burns as well. So with the idea being that every commission I find per year will go in this list and then be sent on to the various different organizations. So in this case, Lyric FM. There's some categories here that weren't listed in the previous commission. So you can see here that I've added a non-binary gender section. As of now, I haven't found any person who identifies as non-binary. So for that reason, it's not included within this Excel sheet. But in this one, I'm including in the cases any composers that are listed by the various organizations that does identify as non-binary, so that can be included there. You can see year of commission is key. Fees is the crucial one. I'm currently really like getting the wording together right, so when we approach the various different organizations with this details, to assure the individual composers and the various different organizations that the individual funding information will not be made available at any point during the research to the public. It'll be information that will be ultimately put together in a larger data set. So that's something that that I'm working at the moment to assure the various different partners that we're working with that important information will not be because it's also for the sake of the project. I'm afraid that aspect of the fees could be a major stumbling block. You can see with additional funding, as we're aware, or as I'm becoming aware throughout the research, that a number of collaborative funding processes happen throughout. So, for example, Music Generation, who I'm working with at the moment, Music Generation will often work quite closely, say, with Music Network, Music Network, or various different local arts offices. So it's just to give that different section there. It's important, I think, to ascertain whether it's a direct invitation or call for submission. So you can see that's listed under J&K. Title of the work, whether it's the performer or ensembles involved. Instrumentation, again, that's important to ascertain the scale of the commission and duration and premiere date. And again, there's a point here on notes at the end, so that it can be so that any details that aren't included here that can be brought to my information. As I mentioned a few moments ago, so in relation to the commissioners that aren't listed. So if we just say, for example, Greg Caffrey, number 2, so we can see that Greg Caffrey doesn't have a commissioner there, but I'm looking to just cross-reference that with the Arts Council of Ireland and the Arts Council of Northern Ireland individual funding awards. So that would be the bursary awards from 2004 to 2019, travel and training 2004 to 2019, 2014 2019, music commissions 2012 to 2019, next generation music bursary. I won't list them all, but I'm looking to really see whether any public funding from this stream could have ultimately resulted in these commissions happening. And so that's what I'm looking at there as well. You can see as well that these awards often change over time. So the names of them change and various different other aspects. So this is just a brief overview of some of the individual funding awards that I have ready. This data is already ready to go. So I'm currently in the process of cross-checking that with this data set as well. At the moment, I'm also in the process of looking at the organizational funding awards. So that would be, say, the annual funding, regular funding, strategic funding, projects award, festival and event scheme. This is quite a small revenue stream compared to, say, some of the larger funding streams, like, say, the annual funding or the strategic funding. Roughly on average around 10 to 15,000 awards given to various different festivals. But I want to include festivals and events, because from what was discovered during gender counts, it became apparent that organizations with less funding had a greater degree of gender balance. So I'm interested to see if that also is something that correlates with this current research as well, and that's something that perhaps we can speak about in more detail. I'd love to get Roisin's input on this in a few moments as well, and some other aspects here: touring and dissemination of work scheme, festivals and event scheme, opera production award, and opera commissions are also significant funding streams coming through. Again, with this funding of the various different organizational ACI organization funding awards, it ultimately feeds into organizations like Irish Chamber Orchestra, Irish National Opera, Crash Ensemble. Hard Rain is obviously funded via the ACNI, but again, it's looking at the various different ensembles, whether it be Crash, Hard Rain, Concord, looking at Music Network, Galway Music Residency. Although it receives significantly less funding than, say, the Irish National Opera, again, it's looking towards these different tiers of funding. So that would be in a sort of middle bracket, if you will, in the same way with something like Loud Contemporary Music, New Ross Piano Festival, Waterford New Music, and so on. And really, ultimately, these are the organizations that I'll be sending this list to in a couple of in the coming days, with hope that they can fill in the details that that we don't have to ultimately feed into the end work. Again, there's obviously a number of publicly funded opportunities outside of the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, ACI and ACNI. So whether that be RTE Lyric FM, the National Concert Hall, of course, a key partner of Sounding the Feminists. Music Generation, I should acknowledge, actually, Music Generation have been one of the first organizations to really be heavily involved and be really sending the information that's required. So I would like to thank publicly Music Generation for their support. The Association of Local Arts Officers. Initially, we began by looking at various different local authority arts offices around the country. This is something that Ciara mentioned in scoping the project. So she contacted Galway's local arts officer and Wexford local arts officer. I wanted to try and broaden that into a more national scale and include that as part of the Percent for Art scheme. Knowing the Score, a publication a number of years ago by Alva Kenny, really lists the Percent for Art scheme as a key way forward revenue stream for composers. So I wanted to echo that within the research as well. Of course, this is across Ireland, an All Ireland research. So we're looking towards BBC Radio 3. A number of listings I've come across so far in this original data set lists BBC Radio 3 funding the Ulster Orchestra, looking at the ACNI annual funding for groups like Moving On Music and ACNI Project Lottery funding. So there's a number of different avenues that I'm currently looking to send the data to within the coming days. And which brings then, I suppose, to the next aspect of the research, which is, I suppose, the qualitative assessment, and that's when we go into the details of the scale of the commission, again going back to these ideas of instrumentation, performers, premiere, venues. All these things will tie into this reading of the scale of the commission. The social and political context of the commission, just in terms of the various different years. Obviously we're dealing a point, a sort of transition over from Celtic Tiger to austerity Ireland and so on. So bringing that sort of political economic context into the work as well. Want to also ascertain, if possible, whether or not the commissions went on to be repeat performances. This is something that I'll be looking to achieve by going over the CMC's events page and really just finding whether or not there was a sort of a secondary life for a continual life for these commissions, I suppose. Composer repeat commissions, I think, is key as well. This will be something that will be very much part of the end process. Really, it's to see, whether or not the gender representation is skewed, whether or not it is the same women or the same men getting the same commissions year on year, and whether there's variety in that. We're also at the stage of the process where a number of the feedback I've received so far, this is feedback I received from the board and also from a number of composers who I've been in contact with. They've suggested maybe looking towards aspects of ethnicity and class. That's something that I'm open to doing, but there is time constraints unfortunately here, but something I'm going to bring in at some point. Ultimately then this will all feed into commissioning and program strategy publication in September of this year. The dissemination of the research, events like this, and thank you very much to Nessa Cronin for the invitation to give this seminar today, because it's a crucial part of where the project is right now, that we want to make people aware of the stage, about where we are, about what the final result, when it's going to be forthcoming. So really, I'm trying to get as much of this, disseminate the research as much as possible over the coming months. I'll be hopefully speaking at the SMI conference in June of this year. Culture Night is a question mark there, because Culture Night may ultimately be an opportune time to present the final report. So that's something that we're currently looking into at the moment as well. It's really it's so important, as I said, at the moment, to really to engage the community as much as possible. So if anyone who wants to share this in any way whatsoever, if anybody who's watching this and wants to get in contact with me, please feel free to email me at any stage. I'd be happy to speak to anybody about the research, particularly any composers. I think it's important to engage with the community as much as possible. I'd also like to acknowledge as well the ongoing support of the Arts Council of Ireland, and particularly Niall Doyle, who's the head of music and opera. Niall has been very, very forthcoming with his time and getting information to me as quick as possible. And I just like to acknowledge his continued support and obviously the funding, which is obviously a huge part of it as well. So thank you very much. I also just want to thank the project's advisory board, Laura, Anne, Yvonne and Anne-Marie from Contemporary Music Sector, and also Seamus Gribbins, Brenda Donoghue, who was involved with the gender counts, and Dr. Anya Montag from, she's currently based in Oslo. So I just want to thank them as well for their input. That's it. I don't want to take any more of your time, and I'm conscious of the time, and I'm really looking forward to getting the input from Ealaíon and so Roisin. So thank you very much.
Great, Michael, thank you so much, and thank you to Laura for the context and background there at the beginning, and to Michael for the just really highlighting the complexities and the challenges in actually in even finding the information, let alone actually setting up some kind of database that can actually capture it and do something useful with it. So we'll move straight on to our two guest respondents. So I'd like to hand it over to Ealaíon, Dr. Ealaíon Ealaíon, to begin with.
Thank you, Verena. Hello, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Mike for that presentation and that overview of what is a very complex and really important project. And it's very welcome, actually, to be generating this data, and also to congratulate Laura and all of the team on Sounding the Feminists for their stellar work. I think it's very apposite that we are together today on International Transgender Visibility Day, and also in the weekend prior to the taking of the Irish census, in which there is no category for non-binary people. And I suppose I begin with these remarks because one of the things and the challenges this project faces and is very clear about facing is the idea of how to categorize people, and the fact that previous data is along gender lines that are male and female, and that Mike now has included a non-binary category, because it raises all kinds of interesting ethical conundrums around dead naming, or also perhaps people not being able to come out as transgender because of the nature of the world in which we live. Ideally, we want to be in a place, well, at least I do, where a transgender woman is a woman and a transgender man is a man, but unfortunately we're not there. So that's one of the nuances that may need to be thought about in relation to this kind of capture over the past 20 years, because of course we are talking about a period, as you said, Mike, that's very much related to changing social contexts, not just around migration, but also around various changes in marriage referendums and so forth. It's also, I think, extremely important, and I really welcome your comments about considering class and ethnicity. And I'll begin with class first, because I think it's really important we all acknowledge that CMC and universities in which many of us operate are institutions and are locuses of power. So the categories with which and through which they operate often reproduce those kinds of power dynamics. And we're living at a time when the humanities and the arts are under duress, and when it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to choose these as viable pathways because of their precarity. So for me, to understand that somebody receives a commission as a woman is very important, but I also want to know if that woman is white, and I also want to know if she's third level education, and I also want to know perhaps if she's middle class. Because these are the pathways through which we will generate our composers. And it's really then therefore vital that we consider what imbalance are we addressing? Who are the people that get to be part of this dynamic of a balance? And to what degree are these obviously shaped by class, and in the context of an ever-changing Ireland, ethnicity also? Because, as Laura pointed out, Sounding the Feminist materials have already informed diversity policy for the Arts Council. And we have to be very expansive in our notion of diversity and inclusion. I saw this great thing on Twitter, of all places, that says, and I'll read it out: diversity is a fact, equity, rather than equality, by the way, is a choice, inclusion is an action, and then belonging is an outcome. And so in analysing this data and in formulating not just commissions, but also policy changes for the future, I think we need a feminism that is truly inclusive and that is very considered in all facets of one's identity, and that these things don't have to be incremental. We don't just have to start first with women in third level education, for example, but that we start right from the get-go to include everyone. So these are kinds of things to think about. I'm timing myself here. I can speak until 5 minutes, so I'm at 4. Yeah, I really want to bring home that point about, I guess, symbolic and cultural capital and its relationship with Western art music. and the degree to which people can access those pathways. I've done some research myself with Irish traditional music, and I often wondered why those of minority backgrounds weren't coming through in this musical form, and made certain assumptions about why that might be the case, and in fact was proven incorrect. It was largely based on money and accessibility to instruments. So as we look back and we start to think forward and glean all of this information, which we can use for archival purposes, which we can use for commissioning purposes, I think that intention of equity is really important, and that inclusion is in its totality. And that uneven score presumes, by its very title, that imbalance. So imagining how this set of data, which is already, we know it has limitations, but it does offer so much from which to jump off. I'm a qualitative ethnographer, but I value very much the quantitative dimensions that we need for policy, and to persuade people that things need to change. People like to see things in numbers, but there's massive nuance in the numbers. So any idea that data is neutral or our categories of inquiry are neutral needs to be continually interrogated. So I'm going to stop there, and I thank you both very much for this really important and provocative and thought-provoking moment. And I'm actually really excited with the kinds of things that can be done from this data. And so if you have any questions after the next speaker, I'm happy to respond or expand on those. Thanks, Marina. I'll hand back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Ealaíon. I think we'll move on to our second respondent, and then we'll open it to the floor again using the Q&A. So can I please pass it over to Roisin? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Farina, and thanks also to Michael, and congratulations on the presentation, which I found really fascinating, and also to Laura and Sounding the Feminists generally on their work in campaigning for gender equality, and also to Dr. Ealaíon for her comments just now, which again were incredibly thought-provoking. I do feel that this data, this work that you're doing, Michael, is something that is very important in terms of getting a fuller picture of the, I suppose, the scene in terms of commissions and the track record in terms of commissions. I was struck when you were going through the slides, just what an enormous task you have ahead of you, and also the enormous amount of work that has already been done in the original scoping project. Because I know from my own point of view, as someone who has commissioned work, that it's not always a straightforward process. So just for example, to put on my finding a voice hat, I know that we have commissioned work that has originated with Finding a Voice, where I have made a decision to commission composer or composers and approach those composers. And then in other instances where performers have approached me and said, we would like to, or I would like to commission this composer to write a piece for me, so I think the whole area of commissioning is something that is not a straightforward one. And I was really struck when your slides were going up of just the myriad of organizations that are involved from the point of view of public funding, and that's not even getting down the route of privately funded commissions. And also the web between performers and organizations in terms of the commissioning process, and then how that links through to the composers. So one of the things that struck me in terms of I suppose the eventual data, and I'm not sure if this is something that you have considered including and maybe decided not to, because as I said, you already have an enormous amount of work ahead of you. But it was to do with I suppose the age of the composers when they were commissioned. It would be interesting, I think, to see whether it is the case that if we are going down these sort of binary categories of male and female, whether it is the case that male composers are commissioned at an earlier stage in their career, or whether they receive larger commissions at an earlier stage in their career. And this is something that I would be interested in, because I think it might be I suppose something worth following up on. But as I said, I don't know if this is something that you have already considered and decided against, or whether the committee has decided against it. So again, I suppose you mentioned as well the lack of records, and this is something I can empathize with, because as a small arts organization, I know that that we do our best to keep records, but even though Finding Voice is only 5 years in, already I can see the challenges in terms of keeping accurate records, and your comments about the practical issues around staff changes. I think is a really valid one. I'm also really interested in the comment you made about possibly smaller organizations being more open or having a greater degree of gender balance when it comes to commissioning composers. And again, I think this is something that I would be really interested to find out about at the end of the research. And just finally to say that, from the point of view of finding a voice, I would be really happy to share the eventual research. I know you had spoken about having, I suppose, just disseminating that eventual research, and it is something that Finding Voice would be very interested in. And would be very happy to share in whatever public forum we can. So just in terms of finishing up, I know I'm coming up to my 5 minutes. I haven't been as eloquent as Ealaíon in her response, but hopefully I've thrown out a few things that might be thought-provoking. I just want to say congratulations again, and how interesting and important I think this research is. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Roisin. I think two very eloquent responses there, both of them. Thank you. So I think what I might do now is, we've got a couple of questions in, but Michael and Laura, if you want to respond maybe firstly to any of the raised by Roisin and Ealaíon.
Well, I suppose can I go first, or do you want to say anything?
Yeah, please. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I mean, I just want to say thanks so much, well, to Michael, first of all, for presenting all the data, but also to Ealaíon and Roisin for those really thoughtful and engaged responses to the work. And I'm so glad, Ealaíon, that you mentioned today being the Transgender Day of Visibility. I mean, I was aware of it from social media, but it just slipped my mind, and I'm so glad you brought it up. And I think you're right, it's such an important point that we need a more inclusive language to recognize people of all genders. And I also I share your disappointment that the census, which will happen this week, is so kind of reductive and binary in its approach to how people are identified. And I was really interested as well to hear, Roisin, what you were saying about the similar kind of challenges that you faced in, the work involved in programming for the Finding a Voice Festival. I suppose from my perspective, I'm somebody who's as well just been watching Finding a Voice grow each year, and I'm always so excited to see the programming on it. So I just want to say thanks to both of you for all the work that you're doing and for your contributions today as well.
Thanks, Laura. Michael?
Thanks, Laura. Thank you very much, both to Ealaíon and Roisin, for some really interesting points. I think it was one of the reasons I wanted to include at the very beginning was the definitions, because it is obviously we want to be as inclusive as possible from the beginning, and even in terms of how we're assessing the gender of the various different composers. Is obviously most of it is it's just use of pronouns in terms of how they're described. Most of them, most composers, when they register for CMC, will have to categorize themselves as male or female, or I'm not sure if there's a non-binary option there as well, but it'll be interesting in terms of following up. Maybe Yvonne is here as well. Maybe she can follow up in the chat about that. But we obviously want to make sure that that's there. I also want to follow up as well on that, in terms of, at the moment, I need to go back through every one of the composers as well, and if the composers are currently identifying you know, in as male or female to find out whether the year of the composition was the same instance as well. So that'll take a bit of time probably down the line once I get to the end of the data set right now. The class aspect and the age aspect is a really interesting aspect, and the age one is something I've been thinking about. I've certainly found so far more young male composers being given opportunities than women. So I think that's something that will have to come into report. I think age will be important there to reference it. I think class is really interesting, and it goes back actually to the first couple of weeks of the work I was doing. I was listening to a podcast that CMC has called Amplify, and Amanda Fury was giving a podcast where she was talking about, you know, I think Dublin in particular was becoming, you know, a kind of almost, you can't afford to live there. It's just this basic reality of the economic practicalities of living. And, you know, the research of that is the practicalities aspects that I'm really hitting my head against so much in terms of the practicalities of the various different streaming aspect, or the various different funding aspects. All these things are hugely important, but also, you know, really just actually lost my train of thought there a moment, but I think that's the. Sorry, I think you were going to say something. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Mike, it's really interesting if you do add geography, or if you do add like precarity or permanent employability, because if you have the wonder of tenure, for example, in university, then you can apply for things and it's not bread and butter. Versus people who may simply not have the time, or younger female composers who are perhaps in their 20s or early 30s who are also maybe trying to have families. These are nuances that are very, very hard to capture, but in getting some of these, you allow somebody else to go ahead and do that research. I'm trying to imagine somebody coming to your data set now and going, oh, I wish. Yeah. And it's that. So yeah, where do people live? Where do the most grants fall to? And are people employed? Are they in permanent position?
Yeah.
Could
I
be.
think that's key. I mean, it's something I spoke about recently with my last meeting with Yvonne in terms of the data. I think the data will ultimately be framing, which will be probably every data set I'm going to be releasing will have a substantial qualitative assessment that'll be underneath it. That'll really have to go into some details of these are the most interesting case studies that we found. Where it's obviously not mentioning individuals in situations like this, but just to highlight certain characteristics that we're just finding coming across. And I think that's going to be the more interesting thing as I develop towards doing the third stage of the project. But yeah, I mean, the class and ethnicity thing is something that the more I'm going into it, the more I think it needs to be part of what's there and engage as well. So thank you for that.
Great. We've had Yvonne Ferguson has joined us. I know that you had a for her, Michael, if I don't know if Yvonne wants to respond.
Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, I'm finding this a little bit disconcerting because okay, see now.
Oh.
Okay, right. I was a little bit disconcerted there because I can only see the panelists on the screen and didn't know whether I was muted or unmuted. Yeah, it was a fantastic presentation, Laura and Michael. Obviously, I know a lot of it already, but it was great to just get a recap actually and see where we're at this point now, a few months into phase 2, and well, really stimulating to hear from Ealaíon and Roisin as well, with their feedback. Yeah, there was a specific question for me, I think. I suppose it was the one about that you had brought up, Roisin, about had we considered if males are commissioned earlier in their career and for larger commissions. I'm fairly sure we have discussed that, Michael, at some stage over the last few months, because it's very interesting. I mean, this has been raised by the advisory committee as well in terms of where works are programmed, if they're in a lunchtime concert. or if they're on Friday night concert, getting, you know, a fair bit of more publicity and profile. So all those kind of nuances for performance and commissioning we're certainly given consideration to. I suppose it's just to clarify on the data that is in the CMC FileMaker library database. We have not, in representation applications, asked for gender up to this point. You know, we're 30 years plus in operation, so historically we have not done that. We have done, as you have pointed out, gone from pronouns, gone from people's names. And that is how the box is ticked on our library database. It was not a self-declaration way of doing things. We have updated our representation application form to include, we didn't feel that we were at, that it was appropriate for us to have a kind of number of tick boxes. And it was the first thing I noticed about the census as well, that there were only 2. So we have a line, you know, in our application form along with date of birth, address, and it says gender, and it's optional. So people can actually write there what they want to write. There's no selection of boxes to tick. That's what we have done in our recent application form. That's how we are proposing to address it. But historically, yes, we've done, I think, probably the same as other organisations. You know, so it's just to kind of clarify that. And, you know, it is that historic data that Michael is working with from our library database.
Great. Thanks, Yvonne, for joining us there at short notice. I mean, in some ways, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to, you know, the gender would be relevant, but unfortunately, it really is relevant in this situation. If there's any questions, there's a couple of questions there in the Q&A. I might just read out. There's one from John Brady there. What a great project. A question on ethnicity. Often we focus on recent Irish migration when discussing ethnicity, but I think it's imperative to know how many people, women especially from the traveller or Minker community, are included here. If you've time to look at ethnicity, have you encountered any traveller women composers? Gender, ethnicity and class are obviously very much inextricably linked inextricably for traveller women.
Hi, John. As of yet, I haven't, but I haven't gone into exact detailing of every composer so far. So that's something that may emerge during the research. Mainly, what I'm doing right now is just going by you know, by pronouns, and that becomes my identifying aspect of the composers. Obviously, I'm not aware of. So that, you know, that becomes the way right now. But it's something I would like to certainly look into as research goes on. And I think it'll be interesting too. And I think this is one of the reasons why I want to be very, very broad with the research scope as well, to include smaller festivals and smaller, you know, commissioning bodies as well, because I think that'll ultimately, I think if there is a stream of revenue, that it'll be well, perhaps it will. So that's why I want to be include as much as possible. But so certainly something to think of. Thanks, John. And thanks, Yvonne, for coming in there as well, for clarifying that also. Thank you.
Great. So if there's any other questions, please put them in the Q&A. I have one question, Michael. You mentioned about so the category of funding or the fee. Is that one of the categories and it's proving elusive to get hold of? And I was actually thinking about then the fee per minute of composition. You know, how that actually compares or works out.
Well, one of the initial ideas that myself and Yvonne were doing when we were discussing this is asking whether or not the commissioner used the CMC's advice. So the CMC has advice for our commissioning agents, and that became a kind of a way for them to tick the box whether they did or not, and then we could calculate the fees accordingly. That's been given us some positive feedback there, but we're also finding that you know, we really, you know, I suppose it is a question that we're all ultimately wanting to find out is how much individual composers were being paid, whether men are being paid more than women, and you know, this is the key data to get out there. We're also anticipating that'll be the information that'll be less forthcoming, because obviously that's going to be protected, you know, by GDPR, and also just, you know, various different organisations and individual composers may not want that information to be as we pull out there. So again, back to this conversation myself and Yvonne had, we're anticipating that any of that information that becomes available will only be accessible to myself and Yvonne. as part of the work, and it won't be made available. You know, any of the individuals. It'll ultimately be added up by me, if you will, and then kind of brought as data. But it's trying to get that wording right to make sure that when we send on to the various different organisations that this is what we're looking for, that they won't be put off by that fee bracket. You know, that's the thing. So again, I'd appreciate someone's advice on that in terms of how to approach this, particularly Roisin, in terms of you know, is that something that we should be concerned of in terms of people might be, you know, they may not be they may be more forthcoming than I'm anticipating, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that from the point of view of finding a voice, we've always used the CMC's guidelines as being the jumping off point for commissions. But obviously within even those guidelines, it's per minute, but it also depends on the seniority of the composer. And again, that's something that, you know, that it's up to both the organization and the composer themselves to decide whether, you know, at what stage of their career they're at. And sometimes, you know, it does come down to budgets. And other things, but certainly the CMC guidelines would be our starting point. I think that is going to be, I suspect that it is going to be a challenge to get kind of accurate information on, because you know, particularly if it is the case that you know, organizations or public funding bodies feel that they have, you know, maybe under, you know, paid under the going rate, you know, it's the equivalent of putting up your hands and saying, you know, I'm not paying the kind of living wage to my employees, you know, and so my suspicion is that the organizations that have paid a fair rate will be forthcoming with the information, and that the ones that haven't will drag their heels and point to GDPR and other sort of ways of not disclosing the information. But I mean, I think it is great that the eventual research will feed into a sort of a new set of guidelines for CMC, because I'm not sure how long the existing set of guidelines have been there, Yvonne. It's a while, I think.
A long time, Roisin, a very long time.
I mean, they probably are. I think we've always kind of gone for the upper end because of the fact that we felt, okay, maybe they're just a little bit out of date. And again, it depends on the scale of the commission as well. You know, if you're asking somebody for, you know, for a longer piece, for, you know, a greater number of performers, you know, and you've got a maximum that you're allowed to apply for, you might kind of agree on something that is not quite the price per minute as per the CMC guidelines, but that, you know, I think that does still reflect a fair amount for the work involved. But anyway, that's just my kind of tuppence halfpenny worth on that.
Actually, I mean, the other aspects, I mean, if, you know, here's the three key parameters will ultimately be, you know, scale of commission, you know, fees and duration. And, you know, if we fall back to duration and scale, you know, my concern is, even at this stage, that it'll somehow be, you know, it'll weaken the project by ultimately not having fees there. So it's just really trying to get our wording right, to try to make sure. And again, so far we've had the organizations that we have spoken to, there's and again, this is where CMC becomes crucial to it. It's that door opening to be able to have that kind of you know, friendly introduction at the beginning, and that's why we wanted to, you know, correlate as much information for them first, to really just to be to really engage in a kind of partnership with these organizations, and to, you know, to assure them that the information that's been given is for the betterment of the industry, which will ultimately, you know, improve their organizations as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that as you say, I mean, that would be a really crucial piece of information. And I think that you know, the fact that you're making sure that that information will not be publicly available, that it will just be between yourself and Yvonne, and that then you'll be sort of averaging it out or doing the sums, but that, you know, what everybody has paid will not be made publicly available, I think would be very important in terms of reassuring organizations and institutions. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. So we still have a few more minutes left if anybody has anything they want to ask. Ealaíon, I don't know if there's anything else you want to respond to since
Not at all. I suppose I would just want to reiterate the point that as we do any kind of investigation or any kind of data collecting, to really realize that data itself is never neutral, and that our categories that we even bring to the table that we suppose are the important categories often have been informed by kind of institutional imperatives that we haven't reflected upon. And that it's a great time not to be critical, but to be really thoughtful about one's mission as an institution and one's mission as a researcher, and the kinds of social change and for whom we want to bring these things about. So, reflecting on everything from composition, genre, to how does one kind of come to the CMC? How do people find their way to those pathways? How did those who are involved know to apply for these things? Because I know Culture Ireland in particular right now is really trying to reach out to different communities to say, actually, we want you to come and get funding from us. So how do we reach you? And I think work like this is hugely significant in that respect, because not everybody will at any point consider themselves to even label themselves as a composer. Yes, it's a professional thing, but it's also and sometimes aspirational for people. And sometimes just seeded commissions targeted at younger women, for example, if it's lots of young men who are getting commissions, or a very specific commission for someone who maybe isn't literate in contemporary forms of music notation or other ways, but can put something multimedia together. How does that then bring in a greater and a broader sort of inclusion into where we want to be? So I guess, always thinking about the power dynamics in what we do. And the privileges we come with ourselves, even here today, the kind of knowledge we have, the cultural capital we have, and the ways then in which it's just about acknowledging and understanding they inform our discourse, our practice, and our categories of understanding. Then we can like Yvonne is saying, 30 years of historical data, that's what it was. There's absolutely, it's wonderful that it is there. Now, why was it gathered that way? What might we learn from that? And I think Yvonne has explained that really, really well. And so in generating this database, you're actually in many ways generating an ideology. No pressure. So you're going to create a font of knowledge, or at least of types of knowledge that other people will come to and ask specific questions about just because of what's there. And so continually keeping the aspiration of Sounding the Feminist, which is about inclusion, equity, balance, fairness, visibility, all of those kinds of things. If we can embody those in our practices, we'll do really well.
Fantastic, thank you, Ealaíon. I think that's a really important, I suppose, point actually for all of us in whatever research we're doing, wherever we are. And I think that's maybe a fitting way to start to bring this to an end. I just think there's a comment there from Audrey Walsh. She says, we collectively need to use the new comment box on the census to say that there should have been more thought put into the gender question. I think that's something we can certainly all agree on. So I think at this point we're nearly out of time. So this has been such a huge learning curve, I think, for everyone here today. It's been really, really useful. So I'd like to thank Michael and Laura, first of all, for their presentations, and then to Ealaíon and to Roisin for their responses, and really thought-provoking responses as well. And I guess we just look forward to wish you well, Michael, with the task ahead. I mean, it's an incredibly complex, as you've outlined, the kind of complexities just in gathering the information and then in categorizing it as well. So we really, really look forward to the results of that into September and when it's disseminated. So thank you all very much.